Hello, everyone. Good morning. I'm Dr. Edgar Christian Quaresma. I'm an assistant professor in the college, and I'm also a medical oncologist by profession. So, before anything else, I'd like to thank everyone for taking your time and waking up early for this lecture. I appreciate your participation, and I also anticipate your uh, eagerness later on while we make this lecture interactive. So as they say, we learn best when we all learn from each other. So I'd be entertaining questions towards the end of my lecture, and I would also like you to share your insights as well. So for this morning, I was tasked to deliver a lecture on the complications of systemic treatment in cancer. This is one of the more interesting topics in medical oncology that I'm always eager to repetitively share with everyone. So we all know that the systemic treatment in cancer, such as your chemotherapy is the traditional backbone for as a systemic treatment for cancer, and your novel agents recently, your targeted therapies and your immunotherapies have revolutionized cancer care, but they also poses a spectrum of complications. And among these complications, uh, this includes an impact on many of our organs or multiple organs. They also have impact. They also have an impact on diminished quality of life, and they also have concerns on the continuity of treatment. So the management and of these complications is very crucial for optimal patient outcomes. So allow me to share our roadmap for this morning's lecture. So the objectives of this topic of interest would be as a third year medical students, you would be familiar with the different types of systemic treatment in cancer. We would want to recognize general and specific adverse effects of systemic treatment. So you would notice later on that there are generalities in terms of adverse effects, and there are unique adverse effects of a particular systemic treatment that is not shared with the rest of the types of systemic treatment. And the third is to understand how to effectively approach and manage these adverse effects. So let us review, no? The goals of cancer treatment is number one, to potentially cure the patient. So our intent is curative when we diagnose the patient at the earlier stages, like stage one and stage two. Of course, the scenario will be different if the patient has a diagnosis of locally advanced or metastatic cancer. So the ideal alternative, if we were not able to diagnose the patient early, or we were not able to screen for a possible cancer, the alternative goal is to prolong survival while we maintain the patient's functional status and quality of life. And of course, when we maintain the patient's functional status and quality of life, we also relieve the patient of his or her symptoms. So in medical oncology, we have a similar uh, performance status parameters or grading with cardiology. If the cardiology has the New York Heart Association performance status, we have the Eastern Cooperative Oncology Group performance status. So the ECOG performance status. So we rely our management based on the ECOG performance status of the patient. So if you will come to read on your free time about the ECOG performance status, it is composed of a 0 to 5 grading, with 0 being the patient is fully active and can perform the activities of daily living. One, with mild strenuous activities, the patient can still perform the activities of daily living. Two, patient will have the ability for self-care, and most of the time, or 50% of the time, can still perform activities of daily living. ECOG 3 is more on the patient being bedbound or uh, chair-bound, and the patient requires assistance for self-care. 4 is more on limited self-care, and number 5 is patient is already dead. So these are the ECOG performance, the Eastern Cooperative Oncology Group performance status. Okay, let us review the 3 traditional modalities of cancer treatment. We have surgery, radiotherapy, and chemotherapy. So surgery and radiotherapy are your local treatments, and your chemotherapy, which is the backbone of all systemic treatments, this is your systemic treatment. No? So let us proceed with the complications. Complications of systemic treatment in cancer may occur during treatment or after treatment has been completed. So it can be short-term or long-term adverse effects. Recovery depends on the patient's overall health and type of chemotherapy utilized. So as you would learn later on, there are several adverse effects of systemic treatment. And adverse effects, as I said, are frequently short-term but may cause permanent changes in some occasions. But if it's short-term, management is usually supportive. No, we can do management, supportive management at home with these short-term side effects. So before we delve into the specific adverse effects of systemic treatment, let us classify the types of systemic treatment involved in cancer. So number 1 is cytotoxic agents. So also known as your chemotherapy agents. They mainly target the DNA structure or segregation of DNA as chromosomes in mitosis. So they work by killing cells in the cell cycle. So as for targeted agents, these are small molecules or biologicals designed and developed to interact with the defined molecular target, important in either maintaining the malignant state or selectively expressed by the tumor cells. So there is a target receptor. That's why it's a targeted agent. In Harrison's principles of medicine, hormonal agents were placed under your targeted agents. Hormonal agents, on the other hand, capitalize on the biochemical pathways underlying estrogen and androgen function and action as a therapeutic basis for approaching patients with tumors of the breast, prostate, and uterus in origin. So as you would note by pattern of behavior, the breast, the prostate, and the reproductive system are all hormone responsive cancers. So they can also benefit besides chemotherapy from your hormonal agents. And of course, your biological agents. So as I have said earlier, the biological agents are your novel agents in cancer. No? These are newer systemic forms of treatment. And these are macromolecules that have a particular target or may have the capacity to orchestrate or regulate the host immune response to kill the tumor cells. A perfect example of this is our recent agents, the immunotherapy. No, the concept of immunotherapy is that it stimulates the immune system to be the front line of under proliferating the cancer cells in the body. Okay, let us learn about the clinical settings. Okay, so when we say we give adjuvant treatment, we say that we give the treatment after surgery. When we say neoadjuvant, we give the treatment before surgery. The difference of neoadjuvant and adjuvant clinical setting is in the neoadjuvant setting, there is still a tumor. No, the surgeon renders that the tumor is deemed unresectable for the time being. That's why the surgeon refers to a medical oncologist for a neoadjuvant treatment in the goal of downsizing the tumor. Of course, when we downsize, we also downstage. And also, the main goal of neoadjuvant treatment is to achieve complete pathologic response. So zero, no? Zero residual. We do not have any residual disease after neoadjuvant treatment. On the other hand, adjuvant treatment is the tumor has already been resected. The surgeon refers to a medical oncologist for adjuvant treatment to improve or to prolong the disease-free survival. Because in the adjuvant setting, we do not have any more a tumor or a mass um, or a mass to uh, to shrink. No, it has already been resected. We just have to improve the disease-free survival of the patient. That's why we give systemic treatment. So when we say palliative, it is given in the metastatic setting. So the patient already has evidence of disease elsewhere. Because it could have a lot of lines following palliative treatment, like we have first line, second line. The patient can still receive third, fourth, and fifth line. So as long as the patient is in good performance or has an ECOG, has an acceptable ECOG performance status. In clinical trials, we usually give systemic treatment up to ECOG 2. No? So when we say ECOG 2, patient is still up to 50%, up to 50% can still perform activities of daily living. Induction setting is given to induce remission. So it's part of your neoadjuvant systemic treatment. No, we give induction chemotherapy to especially to patients with head and neck cancer. It's still a form of downsizing and downstaging their tumor before we give definitive treatment. Consolidation is given to sustain remission, so it's usually part of the adjuvant setting, and also your maintenance, which is given to assist in prolonging a remission. Again, a part of the adjuvant setting of giving systemic treatment. Okay, so let us proceed to chemotherapy. Chemotherapy is a treatment of cancer with one or more cytotoxic anti-neoplastic drug as part of a standard regimen. When we say one or more cytotoxic anti-neoplastic drugs, we say that the patient can be given a single type of chemotherapy, or it can be in the form of a regimen. When we say a regimen, it can be of two or more types of chemotherapy combined. That's why you would notice when you read on chemotherapy regimens, they are always in the form of acronym. Like, for example, the patient is a breast cancer patient and she will be given an FAC regimen. So when we say an FAC regimen, so it consists of three types of chemotherapy. We have your F, which is your fluorouracil. Your A is your adriamycin, the old term for doxorubicin, and your C is cyclophosphamide. The same way with when we say the patient is a known case of colon cancer and the patient will be receiving FOLFOX regimen. So FOLFOX would be folinic acid, 5-fluorouracil, and oxaliplatin. Because so these are your three types of systemic treatment in a regimen. No? So FOLFOX has three types, but we know that folinic acid is not a type of chemotherapy. Only your oxaliplatin and your 5-fluorouracil. So in the FOLFOX regimen, why do we have a non-chemotherapy form on the regimen? Your folinic acid is acts as your biomodulator. So when you say biomodulator, it enhances the effects of your chemotherapy and also reduces the adverse effects of the chemotherapy. So what is the mechanism of action of chemotherapy? It prevents blood vessel growth, stops cell division replication process, causes spontaneous cell death, or what we termed in medically as apoptosis, and creates a non-dividing cell by altering its structure. So again, it can be used alone as a single agent or in combination with other drugs such as a regimen, and differs from surgery and radiotherapy, for it is almost always a systemic treatment and usually given in intravenous and oral form. So usually given, so we can give it in IV or in an oral form, but we can also give it in other routes of administration such as intrathecal, no, for those with brain tumor. We can also give it intraperitoneally, no, for patients with diagnosed with carcinomatosis. So there are also different, or there are still other forms of or routes of administration other than your intravenous and oral form. Okay, so chemotherapy as a cytotoxic agents works by killing cells in the process of the cell cycle. No? So the cell cycle is where the cell grows and divide. No, it's a series of phases where the cell grows and divide, and it's like birth to reproduction. So the interphase is the longest phase in the cell cycle, which consists of your G1 phase or your growth phase, your S phase or your synthesis phase, when the copying of DNA happens. It is also in this phase that a lot of your chemotherapy works, no? So the G2 phase would be your another growth phase. And we also have your mitosis or your cell duplication. Your mitosis involves, your M phase involves two main processes such as your mitosis and cytokinesis. Your resting phase is when the cell exits in the active phase, it can still enter the cell cycle, but not anymore in an active phase. So it re-enters the cell cycle in a non-dividing phase. So as you can see in the diagram, during the S phase, there are particular types of chemotherapy that works in a particular phase of the cell cycle, such as in the S phase, where most of the chemotherapy works.
Recording stop. Recording in progress.
So for the S phase, we have your anti-metabolite or plant alkaloids. The G2 phase, your topoisomerase inhibitor. So the most common type of topoisomerase inhibitor is your topoisomerase 2 inhibitor or your anthracyclines, no? Your doxorubicin, epirubicin, among other types. And your mitosis phase, where your plant alkaloids work, your vinblastine, vincristine, vinflunine. So these are your some of the types of chemotherapy in a particular phase of the cell cycle. Okay, so there is cell cycle specific and cell cycle non-specific chemotherapeutic drugs. So when we say cell cycle specific agents, this act on certain specific predefined phases of the cell cycle. So their efficacy is measured by when they are given in small repetitive doses. So when we give in small repetitive doses, it means that the efficacy is schedule dependent. While effective for high growth fraction malignancies such as your hematologic malignancies, no? So for your cell cycle specific agents, examples are your plant alkaloids, or topoisomerase inhibitors, or anti-metabolites, and your miscellaneous drug bleomycin. For cell cycle non-specific agents, they act on all phases of the cell cycle during the resting phase, no, during the non-dividing state. So if the cell cycle specific agents is schedule dependent, your cell cycle non-specific agents are dose dependent. So they are given in large doses for longer periods of time. So there is already a longer retention of the molecule, no, in the cell, no, for cell cycle non-specific agents. Effective for both low and high growth malignancies. And the example would be alkylating agents, anthracyclines, and your cisplatin. No? Okay. So let us now proceed with the more common complications of systemic treatment. So the first adverse effect would be myelosuppression. So neutropenia and thrombocytopenia are the most frequent manifestation of cytotoxic chemotherapy-induced myelosuppression. So take note that myelosuppression is mostly seen in cytotoxic agents such as your chemotherapy, and they are less noted with targeted biological agents and hormonal agents. So neutropenia is defined by a granulocyte count that is less than or equal to 1,500 per microliter, and neutropenic infection is assumed for any fever episodes occurring when the neutrophil count is less than 1,000 per microliters, and the risk of and severity of infection is greater when your neutrophilic count is less than 500 per microliter. So this is a nice to know slide. Neutrophils as a median survival of the median survival of mature neutrophils is approximately 12 hours in the circulation and 3 days in the tissues. Your bone marrow contains a reserve of mature granulocyte to last for approximately 7 days. Development of mature granulocytes from committed myeloid progenitor takes approximately 10 to 14 days. And the nadir neutrophilic count. So when we say nadir neutrophilic count, it's the lowest count following chemotherapy every 3 to 4 weeks. And this nadir neutrophilic count is expected around the 10th day of treatment, with recovery beginning around the 14th and completed by the 21st day. So why am I emphasizing this slide? In order for you to understand why medical oncologists give chemotherapy at 3 to 4 week intervals. So when the patient comes in and is scheduled for chemotherapy, for the first cycle, we scheduled the next cycle 21 to 28 days after. Why? Because we know that after 21 to 28 days, the bone marrow will recover. We usually repeat the CBC 1 week after the chemotherapy. Why? Because we know that the granulocytes we know that the neutrophil count can decrease 1 week after. So it's expected around the 10th day of treatment, and we'll be able to catch if the neutrophils count will decrease during that time. But for always remember that the scenario will differ if the patient is a new case or a virgin case undergoing chemotherapy treatment, or the patient has already received multiple lines of treatment. So there's already multiple injury or insults to the bone marrow. So if it's a virgin case, we do not expect the neutrophilic count to decrease during chemo 1 week or 7 to 10 days after chemotherapy. But of course, if the patient has already received multiple lines of treatment, or what we term as heavily pretreated patient, the nadir neutrophilic count may be earlier than than expected. So maybe day 5, no, or less than 7 days, no, after the cycle. That's why it's safe to request for a repeat CBC 1 week after the scheduled chemotherapy. Okay, so absolute neutrophilic count is a computation to...
Recording stopped.
All right. It's a computation to determine the neutrophilic...
Recording in progress.
Chemotherapy. So the formula is ANC equals percent neutrophils plus percent bands times your WBC count over 100. So allow me to make this lecture interactive. Dr. James Nueno, are you around? Dr. Nueno? Okay, Dr. Nueno. Dr. Iril Nicolas. Doc Iril, are you around? Okay, I think my group's not yet around. How about Dr. Mart Navarro? Dr. Navarro, are you around?
Hello. Yes po, Doc.
Doc Mart, so this is the formula for absolute neutrophilic count. So if you were to determine the ANC of a patient with a 5,000 WBC and a neutrophil count of 50 without bands, so what would be the absolute neutrophilic count, Mart? So the WBC is 5,000 and the percent neutrophils is 50.
Wait po, try ko po.
Dr. Michael Pascual already has an answer. So marked 5,000 times 50 over 100. So the ANC would be okay. Dr. Boke, Dr. Acuña have the same answers. Mark, do you have an answer?
Is it 2,500 po, Doc?
So the ANC is 2,500. So the WBC is 5,000 times percent neutrophils of 50 over 100, and you will get a answer of 2,500. Thank you, Dr. Navarro. How about Dr. Adrian Natino? Dr. Adrian, are you around? Dr. Natino? Okay. How about Dr. Jaya Nalugon? Jaya, are you around for this lecture?
Hi, Doc.
Hello, Jaya. Same question, no? WBC count of 1,000. The neutrophils, percent neutrophils is 25. But now the CBC now shows percent bands of 5. No? So again, WBC of 1,000, percent neutrophils of 25 plus 5% bands. What is the ANC, Jaya?
Doc, 300 po.
You have the same answers? So 1,000 plus 1,000 times 30 over 100. Okay. So the answer is Dr. Acuña, Dr. Buke, 300. Dr. Nalugan. So the correct answer is 300. Thank you, Jaya. Okay. So why do we complete for the absolute neutrophilic count? Because this is our basis if we will proceed with chemotherapy or not. So we usually proceed with chemotherapy with an ANC of 1,500 and above. So if the absolute neutrophilic count doesn't fulfill that value, we may plan to defer or we give medications to improve the WBC count of the patient. So why neutropenia is a crucial factor in the decision making for giving of the systemic treatment, specifically your chemotherapy. Because in neutropenia, bacterial infections are common. No, we know that neutrophils combat your infections, and when your neutrophils are low, or when it has a nadir, when it reaches your nadir count, bacterial infections can ensue. No, and the common ones would be your gram-negative pathogens and your Staphylococcus aureus. And when the nadir neutrophilic count may be severe, fungal infections can ensue as well. And the common fungal infections would be your Candida aspergillus and Mucor. No? So neutropenia can commonly lead to infection. How do we manage the neutropenia? So recombinant hematopoietic growth factors, your recombinant GCSF or your granulocyte colony stimulating factor. We have your short-acting, and which is available in our country is filgrastim, and the long-acting would be your pegfilgrastim. What's the difference? Your long-acting pegfilgrastim, this is given for chemotherapy that has longer duration. No? We give chemotherapy in the outpatient setting, or we admit patients for at least a few days to give our chemotherapy. So if we admit the patient and we expect longer duration of chemotherapy or longer infusion, we give the long-acting pegfilgrastim later on, because we know that with longer duration and longer infusion, nadir neutrophilic count may ensue earlier than expected. But when we expect only that the chemotherapy will give some mild form of myelosuppression, we only give short-acting GCSF, no, or your filgrastim. Your GM-CSF is not currently available in our country, but available in other countries, no. There is controversy over giving of the prophylactic antibiotics if we have neutropenia. So we do not give prophylactic antibiotics if neutropenia ensues. We only give recombinant hematopoietic growth factors for this reason. Okay. The next is thrombocytopenia. Thrombocytopenia is defined as a platelet count of less than 100,000 or 100 per microliter. The main risk is hemorrhage, which is increased for platelet counts less than or equal to 50,000. Risk of spontaneous bleeding, including intracranial hemorrhage, is increased when platelet count drops to 10,000. And nadir platelet count, just like your nadir neutrophilic count, is observed 10 to 14 days from the beginning of the treatment cycle, and the recovery is completed by 3 weeks. So we see, no, the recovery is completed by 3 weeks, just like neutropenia. That's why we give chemotherapy at 21 to 28 days interval in order to allow the drug to have its maximum efficacy and also your bone marrow to fully recover. So these are the common agents that causes thrombocytopenia. Your nitrosoureas, mitomycin C, busulfan, melphalan, and lenalidomide may have delayed and cumulative thrombocytopenia. So how do we manage thrombocytopenia? We only have 2 circumstances in which prophylactic transfusions are recommended. So all individuals with a count of less than or equal to 10,000 to prevent spontaneous intracranial bleeding, and individuals with a count of less than 50,000 for whom a surgical procedure is planned. So just like neutropenia, wherein we give GCSF, there are also thrombopoietin mimetics, no, that we can give, and the more common in our country will be your L-thrombopag, no. We don't routinely use L-thrombopag or thrombopoietin mimetics for thrombocytopenia, so as long as there are no active signs of bleeding. But if warranted and the platelet has already gone down severely, usually adult hematologists already initiate thrombopoietin mimetics. Okay, how about the clinical adverse effects of systemic treatment, no? So nausea and vomiting the prevalence of this side effect has decreased with the introduction of newer classes of antiemetics. There are 2 sites that have been postulated to involved during the presentation of nausea and vomiting in patients. One is your area postrema, where your chemoreceptor triggering zone or CTZ is within, no? So when your nausea and vomiting is triggered, most probably it's the area postrema has been triggered, and also your lateral reticular formation of the medulla, which is your vomiting center. So there are 3 clinical syndromes, no, of nausea and vomiting. We have your acute, delayed, and anticipatory. Acute, the side effect or nausea and vomiting happens within the 24 hours of giving the chemotherapy. That's why it's a mortal sin not to give your pre-medications during chemotherapy. Your pre-medications would include antiemetics, steroids, no, your proton pump inhibitors, which is given 30 minutes prior to chemotherapy. So it's a mortal sin not to give those pre-medications, because you know that when you do not give, you can anticipate acute nausea and vomiting, no? So within 24 hours. For the delayed nausea and vomiting, it happens usually at home after 24 hours of giving chemotherapy. So how about for the anticipatory nausea and vomiting? So anticipatory nausea vomiting is usually seen in patients have already formed schema, no, of what to anticipate during chemotherapy. So the mere fact that they see a doctor or they see the chemotherapy or oncology unit, they usually they usually feel nauseated, no, and they vomit even without the chemotherapy being given or initiated, no. So they already developed no fear of what could happen during the chemotherapy. That's why they develop anticipatory nausea and vomiting. So this is a busy slide, classification of emetic risk for intravenous anti-neoplastic agents. So this one's lifted from Harrison's. So most anti-neoplastic agents can cause nausea and vomiting, and they are classified according to emetic risk. So we have your high, which is 90% emetogenic. You have your moderate, which is 30 to 90% emetogenic, low 10 to 30% emetogenic, and minimal, which is less than 10% emetogenic. So for high, for anti-neoplastic agents with high emetic risk, we have your cisplatin, meclorethamine, streptozotocin, cyclophosphamide, carmostin, and the carbazine. So you will only remember cisplatin as the only platinum analog with a high emetic risk, and the rest are all alkylating agents. All right. For the moderate, we have a mixture of your platinum analogs and alkylating, but we do have one monoclonal antibody, your alemtuzumab. No, we also have your topoisomerase inhibitor like your doxo, daunorubicin, epirubicin. So always remember that your anthracyclines or your topoisomerase 2 inhibitors will have moderate emetic risk. So you just classify these anti-neoplastic agents according to their major classification so that you'll be able to remember which is with high, moderate, or low or minimal emetic risk. For low emetic risk, we have your antimicrotubule inhibitors, your paclitaxel, docetaxel, along with your other alkylating agents. And as you can see, there are already a lot of monoclonal antibodies, such as your cetuximab, trastuzumab, and panitumumab. And of course, with minimal emetic risk, less than 10%, your miscellaneous agents, no, your bleomycin, busulfan, fludarabine, your plant alkaloids, vinblastine, vinclozine, and vinorelbine. Your targeted agents, your anti-VEGF, your bevacizumab, and your rituximab, no, your another monoclonal antibody. So this poses less than 10% emetic risk or minimal emetic risk. So why do we have to classify the emetic risk for anti-neoplastic agents? Because we would want to give them the right anti-emetic agent. So we do not overkill. So we give the right anti-emetic agents for the anti-neoplastic agent with emetic risk. So the classes of anti-emetic agents are as follows. We have your 5-HT3 receptor antagonists, your cetrons, no, your ondansetron, granisetron, tropicitron, ramosetron, and palonosetron. Always remember that your palonosetron is your longest acting 5-HT3 receptor antagonist. If you remember, we have your recombinant GCSF, which also has the longest acting agent, your pegfilgrastim. Your 5-HT3 receptor antagonist also has a long-acting antagonist in the form of palonosetron. So palonosetron is given for patients who are undergoing longer duration and longer infusions of chemotherapy. We have your neurokinin or substance P antagonist, your aprepitant and etopitant. And it's nice to know that your steroids also has anti-emetic properties. So they are not given as pre-medications to combat infusion-related reactions or allergic reactions, but they also have anti-emetic properties. So these are the recommended anti-emetic therapy for a single-day intravenous chemotherapy. So for high, so we remember that anti-neoplastic agents with high emetic risks, no, we only have one platinum analog, which is your cisplatin, and the rest are all your alkylating agents. So we give your 5-HT3 receptor antagonist plus steroids plus aprepitant, no? And to prevent delayed emesis that we give also as home medications, we can still give steroids for days 2 to 4, no? The day after your chemotherapy. For the moderate, you can give palonosetron, your 5-HT3 receptor long-acting antagonist plus steroids. And for the prevention, as home meds, we give your steroids for days 2 to 4. For low emetic risk, no, usually most of your monoclonal antibodies have low emetic risk. We only give dexamethasone as pre-medications, and we do not anymore give home medications, no, to prevent emesis. And minimal would be as needed, no pre-medications given, and there are no home medications to prevent delayed emesis given for minimal emetic risk. So in summary, we give more of anti-emetic agents for high emetic risk anti-neoplastic agents, and we only give pre-medications and medications to prevent delayed emesis on as needed basis for those with minimal emetic risk, usually your miscellaneous agents and your plant alkaloids. So how do we manage nausea and vomiting? So we use transdermal patch for use in patients receiving multiple day regimens of chemotherapy, may also be utilized. This transdermal patch, although may cause cardiac toxicity to some patients, that's why we reserve giving this transdermal patch to patients. There are newer agents in tablet form that we can give. No? And how about non-pharmacologic measures? Systematic desensitization and hypnosis have been studied with some success in patients with anticipatory nausea and vomiting. So how about for diarrhea? Diarrhea is defined as passage of more than 3 unformed stools in 24 hours. So acute damage to intestinal mucosa is observed, which causes imbalance between absorption and secretion in the small bowel. So the anti-neoplastic agents that commonly cause diarrhea include your 5-fluorouracil, your capecitabine, and your irinotecan. For 5-fluorouracil, it's one of your antimetabolites, and your prodrug is capecitabine, no? Right? In review, what is a prodrug? May we have Dr. Hervin Mercado? Dr. Mercado, are you around? Dr. Mercado? How about Dr. Shaira Morales? Dr. Shaira, are you around? I think they're not yet around. How about Dr. Margaret Florentino? Dr. Florentino, are you around?
Good morning, Doc.
Marga, in review, what is a prodrug in pharmacology?
A prodrug po is a compound with no pharmacological activity po.
Okay, so when there is already drug intake, so it becomes active and it's intratumoral, no? So thank you, Dr. Florentino. Dr. Fernando, it is a drug that still has to be metabolized by body to be activated, correct? And it's the inactive component of the drug, no? According to Dr. Castillo. So your capecitabine is the prodrug of your 5-fluorouracil. So in active form, when it's taken orally, the active form ensues and the target is intratumorally. So for the diarrhea, oral hydration, dietary modifications, and loperamide may be given to uncomplicated cases. So similarly, constipation has infrequent bowel movements and the passage of dry hard stools. Medications, particularly opioids and vinca alkaloids, no? Chemotherapy agents are the most common causes. So non-pharmacologic treatment would be increasing dietary fibers, consuming plenty of fluids, and increasing physical activity, no? So we usually do our non-pharmacologic measures first before we prescribe patients with medications. We all know that patients could have a lot, no, of intake of medication. So we would want to we would not want the patient to, we would not want to add another form of treatment for this patient. So laxatives, enemas, and suppositories have shown clinical effectiveness. So this is what we usually see, no, when we encounter breast cancer patients, no, and these are more common in breast cancer patient, your hair loss or alopecia. Most of the time, for breast cancer patients, when they undergo chemotherapy, they have their hair fall usually few days before the start of the second cycle of chemotherapy, and as it says in the PowerPoint, it begins 2 to 4 weeks after treatment, and hair begins to return to 3 to 6 months later. So we just reassure patients that they will come back, no, 3 to 6 months later. So usually the affected populations: head and neck, breast, lung, gastric cancer patients, leukemia, and lymphoma patients. Question: what is the chemotherapeutic agent that usually causes hair loss in breast cancer patients? Anyone? Can I have Dr. Tony Florendo? Dr. Florendo, are you around? Before we reveal the answer of Dr. Cardenas, Dr. Angel Galang, are you around?
Yes po, Doc.
Angel, what do you think is the most common? What do you think is the chemotherapeutic agent that is most commonly that is usually the cause of hair loss among breast cancer patients?
Not sure, Doc, pero try lang. Baka yung mga doxorubicin, cyclophosphamide.
So, Angel, what is the chemo classification of doxorubicin? Okay, Dr. San Juan, Dr. Cardenas. Thank you, Doc Galang. Dr. San Juan, Cardenas, Dr. Acuña, and Dr. Paradero. Dr. Boque also answered the same. So these are anthracyclines, no? Your doxorubicin belongs to the anthracycline group, which is your topoisomerase 2 inhibitor. So this is the common cause of your hair loss in breast cancer patients. Thank you for your participation. Okay. So how about fatigue, no? So for fatigue, or cancer-related fatigue, or your CRF, it is characterized by diminished energy, increased need to rest, generalized body weakness, diminished mental concentration, insomnia, and emotional reactivity. So it may be related to anemia, mood disorder, concurrent symptoms, altered energy metabolism. So the cause is multifactorial for CRF, or cancer-related fatigue. And usually, they are managed by non-pharmacologic measures, which is exercise, yoga, counseling, which are proven effective for cancer-related fatigue. How about for the cardiovascular dysfunction? Cardiovascular toxicity includes dysrhythmias, no, or arrhythmias, cardiac ischemia, cardiomyopathic congestive heart failure, pericardial disease, peripheral vascular disease. And anthracyclines are the most frequent cardiotoxic chemotherapeutic agents. Actually, they are the most common, no, and most frequent cardiotoxic chemotherapeutic agents. And other drugs commonly implicated would be your cyclophosphamide and ifosfamide. Let's talk about anthracyclines. No, your topoisomerase 2 inhibitors. Doxorubicin, the first anthracycline, remains most widely used anti-cancer agent over a broad spectrum of malignancies. So, since time immemorial, when we do not have yet your targeted treatments and your immunotherapies, we already have your doxorubicin as a chemotherapy backbone for most types of malignancies. So less toxic formulations would be your liposomal doxorubicin, idarubicin, and epirubicin. So how do anthracyclines cause cardiotoxicity? So there is dose-dependent myocardial toxicity with characteristic myofibrillar dropout, which is pathognomonic of endomyocardial biopsy. But we do not usually do biopsy in order for us to see if the patient already presents with myocardial toxicity. So cardiotoxicity occurs through a root mechanism of chemical free radical damage, and 5% of patients receiving anthracyclines and with a cumulative dose of more than 450 to 550 milligrams per meter squared will develop congestive heart failure. So most of your regimens, no, like for example, we have a breast cancer patient with FAC regimen, no. So FAC, we have your 5-FU, your adriamycin or doxorubicin, and your cyclophosphamide. So per cycle, we give the doxorubicin at 50 milligrams per meter squared. So if we give the FAC for 6 cycles, so we multiply it by 50. The cumulative dose is multiplied by the number of cycles, no, and the milligrams per meter squared given. So if you give the FAC regimen for breast cancer patient at 50 milligrams per meter squared per cycle, and you give it for 6 cycles, the cumulative dose will be only 300 milligrams per meter squared. So for a patient, she would still be safe, no? She would be less at risk for cardiotoxicity because we know that patients receiving more than that or more than 450 to 550 milligrams per meter squared will develop congestive heart failure. Okay? So, just means to say that we also take into consideration the dose required, the safest dose required for a particular patient. Advanced age, other concomitant cardiac disease, hypertension, diabetes, and thoracic radiation therapy are all important cofactors in promoting anthracycline-associated CHF. Of course, if there are comorbidities, no, we usually follow up patients with certain tests. So we will not be missing out on the cardiotoxicity of these anthracyclines. So we have dexrazoxane, no? I haven't used this one, but it's theoretically it can be given, which is an intracellular ion chelator that may limit the anthracycline toxicity. I'm not yet sure, but I think this is not yet available in our country. So we monitor patients typically by multi-gated acquisition scan or your MAGA scan, your cardiac ultrasonography, and more recently your cardiac MRI. But in our setting, we usually request for a 2D echocardiogram in order to monitor the contractility. No, what you would want to see in the 2D echo would be the contractility and the ejection fraction. No, and more recently, cardiologists would report the longitudinal strain in the 2D echocardiogram. The MAGA scan or the multi-gated acquisition scan is the more recent form of monitoring. No? It's like a computed tomography scan. And cardiac MRI, because along with the MAGA scan, we do not usually we do not usually use them for monitoring because they are expensive. So what you can request in order to monitor, no, or get a baseline of the cardiac function of the patient is a 2D echocardiogram. So what do we do when patient develops cardiotoxicity from anthracyclines? We discontinue, of course, the offending agent. They say that diuretics, fluid and sodium restriction, and antiarrhythmic agents may be useful for acute symptoms. But we use also afterload reduction with ACE inhibitors or in some cases beta adrenergic blockers, often usually of significant benefit, and digitalis may be helpful as well. So for patients who have developed cardiotoxicity from the anthracycline, we usually refer to cardiologists for co-management. No? So what they usually do is to closely monitor the cardiac function with a 2D echo and use your ACE inhibitors or in some cases your beta blockers. Okay, how about for the pulmonary dysfunction? So pulmonary toxicity includes these several conditions, no? From interstitial pneumonitis, hypersensitivity reaction syndrome. We have your pulmonary edema, as what you can see on the X-ray on the right side, no? So there are haziness on both lung areas, no? Obscuring your cardiac silhouette. No, I think it's in the both your mid to low lung zones, no? Obscuring your cardiac silhouette. This is a form of pulmonary edema. You have your capillary leak syndrome, eosinophilic pneumonia, bronchospasm, acute lung injury, diffuse alveolar damage. No? Pulmonary fibrosis can be seen in patients who have developed inflammation, no? Or infection. No? Yung tinatawag na scar. No? They develop pulmonary fibrosis. So when they develop pulmonary fibrosis, the lung function may be stiff. No? So that is where pulmonary dysfunction proceeds. So the mechanism of pulmonary toxicity include direct toxic effects on alveolar epithelial cells, the induction of an inflammatory immunologic response, and endothelial cell injury. So for pulmonary dysfunction, the most common noted chemotherapeutic agents to cause pulmonary toxicity would be your bleomycin, mitomycin, nitrosoureas, doxorubicin. No? We do not advise doxorubicin concurrent with radiation, as this would cause pulmonary toxicity. Gemcitabine combined with docetaxel. No? So gemcitabine combined with docetaxel is usually given for patients with sarcoma and lung cancer, methotrexate, and your miscellaneous drug fludarabine. High-dose alkylating agents such as cyclophosphamide, ifosfamide, and melphalan may cause severe pulmonary fibrosis and or pulmonary veno-occlusive disease. Okay. We have this miscellaneous drug bleomycin, or your most common implicated chemotherapeutic agent in most of the adverse effects of systemic treatment. Your glycopeptide antibiotics. No? So it causes pneumonitis by generating activated free radical oxygen species. So it is associated, as you can see in the X-ray, no? There's an interstitial ground glass appearance diffusely throughout both lobes, often worse in the lower lobes. So bleomycin is usually given for patients with lymphoma, no? For those with germ cell tumors, no? Testicular cancer, no? Bleomycin is usually given. So the symptom for pneumonitis generated by your bleomycin chemotherapeutic agent is a non-productive cough with or without fever, which is an early sign of the bleomycin-induced pneumonitis. So toxicity is dose-related and dose-limiting. No, we also discontinue the offending agent. And diffusion capacity of the lungs for carbon dioxide is a sensitive measure of toxicity and recovery. Additive or synergistic risk factors, of course, again, multifactorial, include age, prior lung disease, and concomitant use of other chemotherapy, lung irradiation, and high concentration of inspired oxygen. That would cause their bleomycin-induced pulmonary dysfunction. So treatment for chemotherapy-induced pneumonitis, steroids, still steroids, but always remember that prolonged glucocorticoid therapy can cause gastric upset. So you need a gastrointestinal protection in the form of a proton pump inhibitor, mga omeprazole, pantoprazole, and the management of hyperglycemia. So you can have elevated sugars when you use repeated or high doses of steroids. You can also have heightened infection management, and you can also have treatment of steroid-induced osteoporosis. So antibiotics, bronchodilators, oxygen in only necessary doses, and diuretics may all play an important role in the treatment of chemotherapy-induced pneumonitis. Okay, for the neurologic dysfunction, the mechanism of action would be direct effects on the myelin, glial cells, and neurons that have all been implicated with alterations in cellular cytoskeleton, axonal support, and cellular metabolism. So it's still a combination of treatment modalities for neurologic dysfunction, no? We can anticipate encephalopathies, cerebellar syndromes, myelopathy, peripheral neuropathy, which is the more common neurologic dysfunction, and myopathy. So vinca alkaloids, platinum analogs, and fluoropyrimidines in the form of your 5-fluorouracils are the most commonly implicated chemotherapeutic agents. Okay, so vinca alkaloids, as a cause of a neurologic dysfunction, produces a characteristic stocking glove neuropathy. There is distal sensory polyneuropathy, which involves loss of deep tendon reflexes with initial loss of pain and temperature sensation. Sometimes associated with jaw claudication, autonomic neuropathy, ileus, cranial nerve palsies, and encephalopathy, seizures, and coma in severe cases. So you can see the characteristic stocking glove neuropathy brought about your vinca alkaloids. Your vinca alkaloids, vincristine, vinblastine, vinflunine, among others. Okay. Cisplatin is the most notorious platinum analog in terms of adverse effects. So how does cisplatin causes hearing loss? So through the inflammation of your cochlear cells. So once it enters the cochlea, cisplatin is retained for months to years, and it can cause DNA damage, inhibit protein synthesis, and generate your ROS, or reactive oxygen species, that can lead to inflammation and apoptosis of outer hair cells, resulting in permanent hearing loss. So we usually see this when we give high doses of cisplatin. So the high doses of cisplatin can have a cumulative dose of usually 500 milligrams per meter squared. So associated with sensory neuropathy and hearing loss, especially at doses, so it starts at more than 400 milligrams per meter squared. And carboplatin, if there are indications of contraindications to the use of cisplatin, particularly when the creatinine is elevated, we use carboplatin as a substitute in such cases. And because it is given that carboplatin has lesser effect on hearing. So cisplatin can also cause peripheral neuropathy, but less as compared to your vinca alkaloids. So how about for your 5-fluorouracil? So now we're talking about the specific adverse effects. You have already been told about the general side effects of the treatment. Now we are learning about the unique side effects of a particular anti-neoplastic agent. So your 5-fluorouracil produces dysesthesias and painful hands and feet known as your hand and foot syndrome, or palmar plantar erythdysesthesia. And of course, your symptoms abate when the agent is stopped. So usually see this in the diagram, you usually see this hand and foot syndrome or palmar plantar erythdysesthesia in the hands and in the feet of this patient. So there's erythema. Sometimes patients complain of pain, warm sensation of the hands and the feet. And as you can see, there might be bruising due to the effect of the 5-FU. So we would like to prevent that by stopping the agent immediately. How about methotrexate? It alone may cause acute leukoencephalopathy. So the higher the dose, the more the acute side effects are. So acute toxicity is dose-related, especially at doses more than 3 grams per meter squared. So chronic toxicity in the form of loss of cognitive function and focal neurologic deficit, is irreversible and more pronounced at a younger age. We have the phenomenon chemo brain, no? So there's a previous study on chemo brain among breast cancer patients who are receiving adjuvant chemotherapy. No? So we have the chemo brain phenomenon. So it's a neurocognitive decline from chemotherapy alone. No? But they say in some literature that it's a mixture of other treatment modalities other than chemotherapy. So they say probably it might be along with radiation, or sometimes stress might cause this chemo brain phenomenon. Chemo brain phenomenon is clinically associated with impaired memory, learning, attention, speed information processing, no? Sometimes disorganization, no, the inability to focus. So when you see these patients, no, like breast cancer patients coming in to clinic for follow-up, they tend to have the symptom of forgetfulness, no? They do not answer promptly, no? So, and you may notice that some of the answers are not coherent. But of course, when they are undergoing treatment, it might probably be a chemo brain phenomenon. So there's no clear cause and effective therapy for this phenomenon. How about for hepatic dysfunction? So again, methotrexate, no? Methotrexate has already a neurologic dysfunction and can also cause hepatic dysfunction as well. So long-term methotrexate or high-dose chemotherapy alone may cause veno-occlusive disease of the liver and may present with anicteric ascites, elevated alkaline phosphatase, and hepatosplenomegaly. So you need a laboratory workup for this, no? An elevated ALK phos, and the frequent monitoring of liver function is necessary in this case. How about renal and bladder dysfunction? So again, most commonly implicated anti-neoplastic agent would be cisplatin, which produces reversible and irreversible toxicity and may predispose to accentuated damage with subsequent renal insults. That's why when we admit patients for cisplatin chemotherapy and the dose is high, we usually, or for any other doses, no, even if it's a small dose, we usually hydrate the patient first before we proceed with a cisplatin chemotherapy, no, because it can cause nephrotoxicity when we do not hydrate patients. No, it can cause tubular damage. Cyclophosphamide and ifosfamide have cleavage products also. The toxic metabolite that can produce hemorrhagic cystitis. So this is a common board exam question, no? What type of neoplastic agent produce hemorrhagic cystitis? It would be your cyclophosphamide, and the toxic metabolite would be your acrolate. So hemorrhagic cystitis caused by these agents may predispose to bladder cancer. Of course, we also have reproductive and endocrine dysfunction. No? So alkylating agent is the most commonly implicated agent to male and female infertility. Ovarian failure is age-related, and females who resume menses after treatment are at risk for premature menopause. Reversible azoospermia is observed in males during lower intensity alkylator therapy, and long-term infertility, of course, pag high dose pa din, no, is associated with doses of cyclophosphamide more than 9 grams per meter squared. Okay. We also have oral complications, no? For acute or short-term complications, the taste and the appetite may be suppressed, no? That's why patients coming in who have already received 2 to 3 cycles of chemotherapy, they would usually share that their taste has changed, no? Sometimes they would say na there's metallic taste, no? So other complications besides taste aversion would be your mucositis. Bisphosphonate is not a form of chemotherapy, no? It's usually given for patients who have developed osteoporosis or those who who have bone metastasis from a primary cancer. So we usually request or refer patients for dental clearance prior to bisphosphonate use. So as to prevent the serious complication of ONJ or osteonecrosis of the jaw brought about by your bisphosphonate. Okay. How about Raynaud's phenomenon? No? So 40% of patients treated with bleomycin, again, may develop this phenomenon as a result of unknown mechanism. So spasm of the arteries, no, bluish discoloration of the fingers would cause episodic reduction in blood flow with affected part turning white and blue, as you can see on the photo on the right. Okay, a serious complication of serious and long-term complication of systemic treatment in cancer are second malignancies. No, induction is governed by interplay of factors or age, gender, environmental exposures, genetic susceptibility, and cancer treatment. So the risk for second malignancies is due to shared risk factors. No, genetic cancer syndromes such as Sermen or Lifromeni, Lynch, Cowden's, or Gardner's are example of genetically based second malignancies of specific types. And the risk of treatment-related malignancies is additive and synergistic with combined treatment. So you cannot point out to a specific, to only a single agent or a specific modality, but it's more of a combined treatment for the development of second malignancies. For chemotherapy, it's always associated with two fatal second malignancies, or acute leukemia and myelodysplastic syndrome. No? Acute leukemia, particularly your AML, it's related to treatment with alkylating agents and topoisomerase inhibitors. So always remember that, alkylating agents and topoisomerase inhibitors. Myelodysplastic syndromes are associated with leukemic progression and dismal prognosis. And some chemotherapy drugs may also increase the risk of certain solid tumors, no, like lung, stomach, and your bladder cancer. No, so I think this was already mentioned. No, your and the renal and bladder dysfunction that your cyclophosphamide given in high doses can cause bladder cancer. So with everything that I've said earlier, no, with all the texts, no, the long text that we have discussed, you just remember this chemo man, no, for chemotherapy toxicities, no. Of course, methotrexate, we have the acute adverse effect of stomatitis. You also remember that methotrexate has neurologic and hepatic dysfunction. Bleomycin, your glycopeptide antibiotic, will cause pulmonary fibrosis, pneumonitis, no. They can cause your ground glass opacities in your X-ray. Your doxorubicin can cause cardiac toxicity. I forgot to mention that the second most common cause of cardiac but reversible cardiac toxicity is your trastuzumab, which is a monoclonal antibody, which we'll discuss in the next few slides. Cisplatin, we have ototoxicity and nephrotoxicity. Ototoxicity is caused by the inflammation of your cochlear cells caused by cisplatin, and nephrotoxicity though. So do not forget to hydrate when you are giving cisplatin chemotherapy, as it may cause tubular damage if we do not hydrate rigorously. Cyclophosphamide can cause hemorrhagic cystitis with acrolein as your toxic metabolite, and your vincristine, no, vinblastine, your vinca alkaloids can cause peripheral neuropathy, no, as it's complication of neurologic dysfunction. So let's delve in briefly with hormonal agents, no. So we have hormonal agents are usually have tolerable side effects, no. Your selective estrogen receptor modulator, your tamoxifen. Tamoxifen is commonly available in our country. Raloxifene and torimifene are more common in other countries. So what are the side effects? No, vaginal dryness, vaginal bleeding, risk for cataracts, retinal toxicity, risk for thromboembolic phenomena, and the risk for second malignancies. No, for your selective estrogen receptor modulator, tamoxifen. We usually give tamoxifen for hormone-responsive breast cancer, no? So, but take note, we only give tamoxifen for premenopausal hormone-responsive breast cancer patients. So, we usually request for a transvaginal ultrasound to check the thickness of the endometrial stripe, because we know that when the endometrial stripe thickens, it can cause vaginal bleeding eventually. So for those taking tamoxifen, we do an annual transvaginal ultrasound. For your aromatase inhibitor, we have your anastrozole, letrozole, and exemestane, which causes arthralgia and myalgias. And there's a risk for bone fracture. That's why we do a baseline bone densitometry. Your estrogen receptor antagonist, fulvestrant, given intramuscular injection to your gluteal areas, can cause hot flushes, asthenia, headache, and GI upset, no? Such as nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea. Gluceridine and leuprolide, no? These are given for hormone-responsive breast cancer and prostate cancer patients. No, can cause non-specific symptoms such as sweating, nausea, and hot flashes for gluceridine. And your anti-androgens, flutamide, bicalutamide, and nulutamide. Bicalutamide is the most common anti-androgen that's currently available in our country. So for diarrhea with or without abdominal discomfort for bicalutamide, I've also seen some form of gynecomastia for bicalutamide other than flutamide. And nilutamide has been pulled out in the market because they can cause night blindness and pulmonary toxicity. So the more frequently used anti-androgen would be your bicalutamide. So let's discuss briefly on targeted therapies. No? So targeted therapies is another important systemic treatment options. No? So trastuzumab, no? Trastuzumab, no? Your
Sorry.
yes, Dr. Yes, Dr. Denise. Okay, so let's proceed. Targeted therapies, trastuzumab. It's an anti-HER2 new receptor monoclonal antibody. Just nice to know, no? The monoclonal antibodies are not coined randomly. No, according to the nomenclature of the World Health Organization and those used in the U.S. pharmacies, they are coined. The monoclonal antibodies are coined with a particular meaning. No, like for the substem mab, it is called monoclonal antibody. All right, Urzu is a substem, which means it is from a humanized molecule. Your 2 is a substem for tumor, and your TRAS is a random prefix. So that's how those names are coined. No? TRAS is a prefix, 2 is a substem for tumor, ZU is a substem for humanized molecule, and a substem mab is termed as monoclonal antibody. So trastuzumab is used for as an anti-HER2 agent for breast cancer. It's the second most common cardiotoxic drug, but it is not dose-related and usually reversible. And it is associated with pathologic changes of anthracyclines, and it's not associated with pathologic changes of anthracyclines on cardiac myofibrils. So usually, toxicity is typically monitored every 3 to 4 doses using your MAGA scan or 2D echo. And of course, the treatment is withholding the offending agent. And of course, we refer to cardiologists, and they would offer afterload reduction with ACE inhibitors, and in some cases, your beta adrenergic blockers. Again, how about for your bevacizumab? Your substem mab is monoclonal antibody. ZU is still a humanized molecule, and C is, when you say C, it's a substem for target. And the substem for target is, because bevacizumab is an anti-VEGF agent, the target is the circulatory system. So C stands for the circulatory system, and Beva is a random prefix. So it's an anti-VEGF monoclonal antibody used in combination therapy with a 5-FU-based regimen for metastatic colorectal cancer. So always remember the adverse effects of bevacizumab: hypertension, proteinuria. Proteinuria, we get urinalysis, no, to determine if there's proteinuria in the urine. Bleeding, no, impaired surgical wound healing in patients who undergo surgery during treatment with bevacizumab. So one of the main cause of bevacizumab would be bleeding. So we usually time we cautiously time the schedule of the surgery after the giving of the bevacizumab therapy, because we know that it can cause bleeding. So it's potentially life-threatening. When we get to see arterial thrombotic events, GI perforation and hemoptysis brought about by bevacizumab, and close monitoring of patients is required, especially individuals who are at greater risk for adverse events. Okay, there are small molecule drugs as well as targeted therapies in the form of your tyrosine kinase inhibitors. Always remember the NIBs, or lotinib, gefitinib, afatinib, sunitinib, sorafenib, imatinib, among others. So common adverse effects include hypertension, asthenia. So even if you are already taking the oral TKI, you still have to monitor the blood pressure of the patient, as it causes erratic elevations in your blood pressure. It can also cause diarrhea, mucositis, skin abnormalities, altered taste, and increase in liver transaminases. So management is supportive. You only hold the drug, or you dose modify, and you give symptom relief. Some may cause also diarrhea. So if you give symptom relief, like in the form of loperamide, or you just do oral hydration, no? So management is just supportive for tyrosine kinase inhibitor. So these are other examples of targeted therapies, no, which share similar adverse effects. And the adverse effects for these targeted therapies, similar for all types, would be your myelosuppression, no. They can cause anemia, neutropenia, and thrombocytopenia. And because these drugs are like your CDK4/6 inhibitors, or BRAF inhibitors, your PARP inhibitors, these are all oral drugs, no? So besides the myelosuppression as a common adverse effect, they also share the effects of fatigue. Some may cause the effect of diarrhea. For PARP inhibitor, may cause some ocular ophthalmologic adverse effects such as dry eyes, conjunctivitis, no, uveitis, and retinitis. On the other hand, your antibody drug conjugates, or your ADCs, this share the what's the concept of your antibody drug conjugates? They share the molecule of a monoclonal antibody, and the precision of a monoclonal antibody, and the killing effect of a chemotherapy. That's why, as you can see, they have two names, no? Brentuximab is a monoclonal antibody, and vedotin is the form of cytotoxic agent. Trastuzumab emtansine and trastuzumab deruxtecan. So because we know that they also have the cytotoxic agent properties, it can also cause several side effects, including your myelosuppression, body weakness, and decrease in appetite. Okay, briefly, immunotherapy, they can cause, the concept is to stimulate the immune cells, particularly your T cells, so that your T cells will be able to be the front line in controlling the overproliferation of your cancer cells. So the types of immunotherapy, your immune checkpoint inhibitors, your vaccines, your cancer vaccines are a form of immunotherapy, and your non-specific immunotherapies such as your interleukins and interferons. The first FDA-approved immunotherapy in the Philippines is the immune checkpoint inhibitors, no? Particularly your pembrolizumab. Okay, again, the name, no? The nomenclature, pembrolizumab is the substem would be for the substem for the substem mAb is monoclonal antibody. ZU is a humanized molecule. Your Li is the immune system, no? Particularly your lymphocytes. That's why it's Li. And the Pembro is a random prefix. So pembrolizumab acts by blocking a negative regulator of T cell activation and response, thus allowing the immune system to attack the tumor. So blocks PD-L1 from binding to PD-1, allowing the T cell to work. So for most cancers, you need to determine the PD-L1 expression of the particular cancer. So if it's higher PD-L1 expression, it means that the patient is a candidate for an immunotherapy. Okay, so again, pembrolizumab, immune system, no? It's the first line treatment for metastatic non-small cell lung cancer. Also indicated, actually it's indicated for all okay, it's indicated for all patients with high PD-L1 expression, no? So, but previously it has been approved for use for metastatic non-small cell lung cancer, head and neck squamous cell carcinoma, and advanced melanoma. For immunotherapy, just always remember the adverse effects of pneumonitis, no? For all the itis effects, no? For or inflammatory effects, pneumonitis, colitis, hepatitis, hypophysitis, thyroiditis, and nephritis. Nephritis. Use of corticosteroids is the mainstay of management, and immunosuppression may also be considered. Okay. So I think this would be my last slide. No? Recommendations for follow-up. So all cancer patients should be monitored indefinitely, and cancer patients should be educated about signs and symptoms of recurrence and adverse effects related to therapy. Before you lay down your management or treatment for this patient, you should be able to relate to them the possible side effects. No, you may overshare because not all because patients may experience several adverse effects, but you have to reassure patients that these side effects can be managed supportively. Screening tests should be used on a routine and regular basis, like your mammogram, pap smear, no? Blood count, metabolic panel should be done as warranted, no? So we do not request for labs routinely, no? We only request for diagnostic workups, symptom directed, or if patient already has symptoms. Of course, the backbone still would be your history and physical examination. That should be included as part of monitoring. So it's still the first things that we should monitor or observe, no, before we do our tests, our diagnostic tests. Still the history and physical examination. So with that, I end my lecture. My references are DeVita, Principles and Practice of Oncology, and Harrison's Principles of Internal Medicine. Thank you all for listening. I think I have one question in the chat box. Dr. Magtibay, can you repeat the explanation, unique characteristics for CDK4/6 inhibitors, BRAF, and your PARP inhibitors? Actually, these three targeted treatments have the same similar adverse effects, no? And this would be your myelosuppression. They can present with anemia, neutropenia, or thrombocytopenia, or they can present with pancytopenia, no? You have all the three. Similarly, we can expect fatigue, no? Some with diarrhea for these types of targeted treatments. Your PARP inhibitor can cause ophthalmologic adverse effects such as dry eyes, conjunctivitis. You can also have uveitis and retinitis. So if you have a common adverse effect, it would be myelosuppression. All right. Do you have any other questions? I think I can allow for a few questions before we end our lecture. Or maybe I should be the one to ask you. Okay. If there are no more questions, or if you believe that there are questions that are there are clarifications to my lecture, or if there are other questions that you would want for me to answer, you can also email me in my the College of Medicine email. All right. If there are none, thank you all for listening. No, thank you for taking your time and waking up early for this lecture. If there are no more questions, let's call it a day. I wish you all a nice day, everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you po,
Thank you,
Doc.
Doc.
Thank you po.
Thank you, Doc.
Thank you po, Doc.
Thank you, Doc.
You know.
Recording stopped.